he had spent a winter in Germany, living with some connections.
As a teenager, as a young man?
Well, it was between going to school and going to college. I think my grandfather decided he was a little bit young to go to college, so he got sent off to Germany, lived with this German family.
Is that the Klippfelds?
Yes.
Yep.
And so he did speak German, and then when the war broke out, he thought that's what the action was. And so he telegraphed Ambassador Gerard, who was had been a judge. He was a Democratic politician from New York City, and the acquaintance was my grandfather's, and was gratified to get a telegram from Gerard saying, "Come." And so we went. And went over on the Lusitania, and he describes in the book being seasick and using mother's seasick pills and champagne.
I'd love to read that part of it. Can I read that? I mean,
yes.
I think that's, I took some notes here, looking over some of this, reading portions of the book. I can find out where it is. He says, this is December 7th, 1914. He's aboard the Lusitania on his way. And he says, a nasty groundswell set during the night, and I kept on the map only by constant running and walking. I take it on the map is an expression in those days that he kept himself from throwing up, I suppose. The boat is fairly full up, over 300, most of whom are men, a large number of businessmen going over to look about and try to get orders. Now, this is December 7th, 1914, so August was the assassination of the Archduke, so we're only talking about a few months.
Yes.
And the United States is neutral, not involved, maybe not trusted necessarily, but not involved. It says, then there are a few ladies of the usual transatlantic kind. I have no idea what that means, but no very attractive ones. A good scattering of English, some going back to serve, I should say. A most interesting crowd on the whole, the heads and bosses of various big business interests, instead of the usual traveling men or agents, and a lot of them are making quite a party of it. And then he expresses some regret. The next day, still a heavy motion. I feel wretchedly, am very sick and very angry, and stay in bed all day, sleeping much of the time. In the afternoon, I take some mother sill seasick remedy. Do you remember that?
I've heard of it, but nobody ever gave me any and I used to get seasick when I went to Europe.
Managed to keep down the second dose and feel much better. Most maddening to miss this interesting trip.
So,
sorry.
He arrives in England and stays there, checking in with the American embassy in England and getting his papers. And then he goes across the channel and goes to Holland. And then Holland was not in the war.
Yeah.
Oh, never.
It's the Netherlands that Germany invaded, that's right.
They invaded Belgium.
Belgium.
But not Holland. So goes to Holland and then takes a train to Berlin. And one of the things I found interesting was that the Paris Herald was delivered in Berlin every morning. I guess they didn't believe in censorship in those days or didn't think it was important.
And Hearst had reporters in Germany.
Yes, he runs into some of them. The Times does, the AP does, and McClure's does. So that they were all reporting back. But then when he arrives in Germany, in Berlin, he's typing the ambassador's letters and also visiting prison camps. And going to the theater, which is very much alive and well, including the Germans put on, I can't remember precisely which one it is, but there's an English play translated into German that is playing in Berlin.
He described some opera in there where he said, I couldn't figure out what they were saying at all, but the music was good.
Well, his German, I don't think, I think it got much better, but I think he has a German tutor, and first off, he gets a man who he doesn't like very much. The man does nothing but talk to him, and he decides that's no good. So then he finds a Fräulein Klaus, who's the secretary to one of the socialist members of the Reichstag, and she does much better for him. Winds up taking her to dinner and taking her to plays and improving his German.
So his position, what was his position? He was the secretary, the private secretary of
the ambassador.
To the ambassador.
But he was not a member of the Foreign Service at that time. He studies to take the Foreign Service exams while he's there, and he does take them. And then when he comes back, and at one point he comes back on holiday to the U.S. and he takes his oral exams and becomes a member of the Foreign Service.
This is during the war still?
Yes.
What does he do?
Right.
Does he go back into the Foreign Service?
Well, he gets accepted in the Foreign Service, as I recall, in 1916.
Historians will capture the who, the what, the where when it comes to key moments of history, but this is a personal account of what life was like during World War I, which historians might not be able to capture.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's the fact that they played tennis and went shooting. The ambassador had leased some land where there were rabbits and deer and other things to be shot at. And
Instead of people.
instead of people. And he plays a lot of tennis during the summer. They belong to a tennis club, and by and large, they're there, and some of the Germans are friendly to them, and some of them aren't. And he goes to the theater almost every other night. And they play bridge and they play poker. and life goes on.
Mr. Osborne, when we talk about World War II, no, I understand, but going back to World War I, in World War II, there was a difference between the Nazis and the Germans, and people in the U.S. don't quite understand that until you go to Germany and hear those folks talk about it. Was Germany just unified? Was the average German? Did he understand he was in the war and he wanted? They knew they needed to be in the war.
No, there were the Socialist Party was opposed to the war and wanted to make peace, and there were countless discussions of making peace, with the hopes, among other things, with the hope that Woodrow Wilson would serve as a moderator to bring the two countries together. And at one point, he's friends with a German socialist, essentially liberal, and he arranges with him to send peace proposals to British liberals.
Nice.
It comes to nothing, but there was continually a hope for peace and a hope that the war war could be ended.
Sure. Sure.
Mr. Osborne, I could read what I took notes of from there that I thought illustrated a good deal of what the Germans were feeling about Americans. And this was after, just after the diplomatic relations were severed, about, was it 2 or 3 months before we actually declared war, and the embassy's packing up.
Yes.
And this is Monday, February 5th, he's wrapping this up into several days, Monday, February 5th to Friday, February 9th, 1917. He says, during most of these days, the embassy is crowded with people and it is hard to work. We go through all the motions of being very excited without really being excited in the least. It is more a state of intense nervousness during which one sits round and smokes countless cigarettes and talks it all over without arriving anywhere. Unofficially, everyone is simply damn sorry that it has come to pass, and in general, people are almost touchingly agreeable. The Germans, one knows, are entirely the same, and the waiter at the hotel, one's portier, the taxi driver, etc., are simply rather depressed and sorry that it has happened, and say so very simply and heartily, and are not in the least belligerent. I hear of no member of the staff or other American who has had an untoward or unpleasant incident. Of course, we come into contact with very few full-blown jingos. The nearest approach to anything disagreeable that happened to me was one day, and he describes just a case where somebody owes somebody money and now he's afraid he's not going to get the money back. But the relations, his relations with the Germans were apparently open and convivial.
Well, I think that was right. And it's interesting, the German with whom he tries to connect to the British was somebody named Kurt Hahn, who after the war went to England and he started a boarding school named Gordonston, where Prince Philip was one of the students. And as far as I know, the school still exists today.
You know, there are members of a Hahn family, H-A-H-N, in Auburn. I know some of them. I wonder if there's a connection.
Well, I have a feeling it's a fairly common name in Germany.
Your family, the Osborne family, is well regarded in Auburn and in Cuyahoga County. When you read your father's diary, 102 years after he last wrote an entry in it, did it change your perception of him at all, knowing what was in his head during one of the most complex times in the history of the world?
Well, I was interested because I found him somewhat snobbish at this point in his life, something which he really wasn't later on.
You said you think he was snobbish during this period? Or?
Yes.
Oh, I see.
Well, I qualified that, I said somewhat snobbish.
Somewhat, I heard
But he doesn't like people who went to Yale much.
He was a Harvard man, right?
Oh, yes. But he has he seems to have had a very pleasant time there, because they did a lot of going to the theater, and he did a lot of playing tennis and playing bridge, and he didn't like poker much, but he enjoyed the bridge. And then he also he went up to visit some distant cousins who lived in Denmark, and met my mother there. And later, when he went back to Copenhagen, he continued to he used to see her, and they got married in 1918. But as I've said before, that he went over to England once while it was before he had to leave for the U.S. war. And it's very interesting because people he ran into in England thought the Germans were not treating the British prisoners well. And he, who had been to visit these camps, said, no, that's not true. They're living up to the Geneva Convention. And he finally stopped saying this because the English get so annoyed at him because they don't believe it.
You were telling me, I missed it so far, but you were telling me about attending, was it the Mikado?
Well, one of the prison camps, the prisoners, for a Christmas show, they put on the Mikado. And another time they do a version of Cinderella that are, and they have representatives of the camp who are permitted to go into Berlin to the embassy. One gets the sense that the Germans who were in control were very straight-laced and adhered to the best ability to the terms of the Geneva Convention. Now, what happened in the Second War, I don't know. I did meet one man who was captured at Dunkirk and spent the rest of the war in a German prison camp. but he did not. He didn't suggest that he'd been badly treated, whether it was or not. He just wanted to forget it. But his whole unit was captured and stayed together as a unit.
What surprised you the most about your father going through his diary?
Well, I think that it was a tendency to be somewhat of a snob.
But only somewhat.
I had to qualify that. And he keeps getting letters from his family being criticizing the Germans, and he's writing back and saying that this isn't quite the way it is. And so they all think he's pro-German, which he wasn't. But
But he is, you say that he's somewhat of a snob, and yet when he talks about common Germans, ordinary Germans, there's affection.
yeah,
I mean, I didn't see, I think I know what you're talking about, but at the same time, he's very human.
well, he's talking about second-class Americans.
You had mentioned earlier that your dad hand wrote the diary and that years later it was transcribed and computerized.
So he had a secretary who went through and typed it all up.
Where, before that happened, where was it?
Somewhere where he kept all his papers.
How did you come across it?
I didn't, he got it out, I think in 1953. It was when it was typed, when he found somebody to type it all up, because it was 800 typewritten pages. And then it was typed up with carbon copies, which he gave to his 3 sons. And I don't think my brothers ever read the diary either.
Did he ever talk to you about what the war was like, or did he keep it to himself and his diary?
He pretty much kept it to himself. He did say every now and then, and he did mention somewhat visiting the prison camps and saying that some of the complaints were legitimate and some of them weren't. For instance, he went to one camp where the British officers complained about being, having from time to time, having to share rooms with enlisted men.
I have to cut for a minute, please.
Sure.